Okay, today we're going to tie Partridge and Orange soft hackle. I'm going to tie this on a size 8 3906 mustad hook. It's a little bigger than I would normally fish, but I'm going to give it to you this way so you can get a better picture of it. First thing I'm going to do is mash down the barb in the hook. Always fish barbless, makes it a lot easier on the fish and a lot easier on the fisherman because you don't have to struggle as much to get that fly out of the fish's mouth. And this is a fly that will end up in the fish's mouth. Okay, now here's that little brass bead. You can see that there. Brass bead has a little hole in the front and a big hole in the back. The little hole goes on first, ends up next to the eye. Now I take the hook, place it in the vise, get it in there nice and deep so I've got plenty of grab on it, and take my next material. First material was the bead. Next material is going to be orange thread. I'm going to wind on the thread there. Then I take my trusty single-edged razor and bing, nip that off. Next material is orange floss. Now floss always comes off a little draggly like this, makes it hard to tie, but a little bit of moisture makes it a nice one piece, and then you can tie it on very easily. This is silk floss. I much prefer the silk floss to the rayon floss. Rayon is hard to work with. Your fingers tend to shred it very easily. It comes apart. Silk floss is much nicer. And it's kind of nice to tie with silk anyway. It's a little more traditionally approved. Okay, so now we've got that floss tied in, and we're going to make a nice thin floss body here. Not real thick, and as I tie it on, I'm trying to keep the strands close together, and I'm trying to avoid that nasty hook point that wants to catch my floss and make my body all fuzzy because it'll cut it very easily. So I stay away from the hook point, tie it in nice and tight. There we go. Get up to right here. That's about 1/4 of an inch back from this great big size 8 hook, and then I'm going to just wrap over it a couple times to tie it off. Okay, and then with the scissors, give it a little snip, and then that takes care of the floss. Next material here is tan hare's ear dubbing, and there's that tan hare's ear dubbing. I'm going to dub a nice fur noodle onto the thread here. So I want this to be fairly fuzzy, but fairly big, because this basically is going to backstop the bead, and it's going to keep the bead from moving back on the hook. So, there we go. Just make that a little fuzzier. A little better. Don't be too neat here. Nice and fuzzy is good. Try not to hit the video camera with your tip of your bobbin. Alright, so we've got that tied in. Take a couple of half hitches there, bing and bing, and then again back with the straight razor, snip that off, and then we just push the bead back against it there, and tie in the thread right in front of the bead. It's always a good idea to check at this point and make sure the eye of your hook is closed. You don't have this problem with some of the more expensive Japanese hooks, but this mustad is an old hook, and mustad's quality wasn't that great years ago. I think it's better now. I always say stay away from cheap hooks. If you're going to spend all this time tying a fly, don't use some cheap knockoff. Use a good hook. Tiemco, Orvis, Partridge if you really feel like spending some money, Daiichi, Dairiki, they're all great hooks. Alright, here's your Partridge hackle. Now you see all that fuzzy stuff near my fingers. I'm going to get rid of that. Don't need that, so that all gets pulled off. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull a couple fibers off back like this with my fingers, and then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to very neatly just snip it off almost right next to the stem, like that. It's like a very short toothed comb, and that is going to serve to lock in the thread. Then I'm going to trim this off right here, and I just have a little tip left. I'm going to take that tip, lay it over, probably like that, and just tie it right in there and lock it in nice and tight. And now we're ready to pull the hackle around. Got my hackle pliers ready. I'm going to try to get a nice grab on the center of the stem there. I was tying these with grouse the other day, which was very frustrating because grouse is so fine, but the partridge is a little heavier duty. So now, not a lot of hackle here. Notice how I kind of pull it back with my fingers. I'm going to take 2 turns of hackle for this fly. And there we go, 2 turns. And then I'm going to come up with a thread, lock that in position, and then I just have to come back, snip off that little bit there. The hackle pliers came off at the last second. Now just a word about soft hackle flies in general. Often you'll see these flies tied and the hackle will all be swept back like that, which looks very pretty, but it's not the right way to tie the fly, because when you're retrieving this fly through the current, you want these hackles to move and breathe. That's one of the things that attracts the fish to them. If they're all swept back when the fly is tied, you're not going to have a lot of life in the water. So take a few turns back through the hackle and make those hackle tips stand out like that. So the flues are at right angles to the fly. Then you can pull them back a little bit to get them out of the way. Make a nice neat head here. And I'm just going to finish this off with a couple of half hitches. 2 half hitches is all you need. You could also do a whip finish, but the half hitches are fine for this. After I've tied a bunch of these, then I'll lacquer them. Okay, so now there's our finished Partridge and Orange soft hackle with a bead. And I think I mentioned the reason I like the bead in this is because I often fish these with a small split shot. And by putting the bead in there, I've got the weight incorporated. Now I'll show it to you from the front. You can see how that hackle is spread out to the sides. That's really going to move and breathe in the water. And as I said, it's barbless because it's going to end up in a trout's mouth.